there, I'm Marilyn, CEO and founder of Cosmic Centers, and we are a leadership development and organizational development consultancy. Today, you're joining us for, I want to say, the third online event, although this was scheduled for last week, so now there's been a change in order. Matt and I actually went live last Wednesday, but then StreamYard, our streaming platform, had a worldwide issue, and we were cut in the middle of it. So here we are. For round 2, and hopefully this one will be uninterrupted. This event is part of our 2-month-long conference all about leadership polarities, which actually wraps up tomorrow. It's titled The Cosmic Dance, Mastering Dualities in Leadership. We've been running the Cosmic Conference for 5 years because one of our principles is sharing what we learn with the world. And every year we choose a theme that resonates with the leaders we work with. And this year we picked something that is a bit of a timeless theme to help leaders master a key skill for navigating in a complex world, the topic of polarities. Now, all leaders, whether they've been in the C-suite for decades or are first-time managers, are constantly navigating what feels like opposing demands. Being in the present, but envisioning the future, engaging our people, but demanding performance, building profitable companies, but also investing in growth, and the list goes on. Now, great leaders know that their superpower comes from developing range, and this ability to dance along the spectrums is what drives sustainable growth for them and their organizations. They go from having an either-or mentality that kind of is ingrained in us from traditional education to a both-and mentality that allows us to thrive in a complex world. Now, joining me today is Matt Bartlett-Bond for the second time, but this time is going to be a winner. With nearly 30 years of experience in the IT sector, he offers a unique perspective on how management practices impact individual well-being and organizational outcomes. In 2019, he pursued a master's in Occupational and Organisational Psychology at the University of Surrey, studying the effects of the pandemic on workplace dynamics and highlighting the importance of communication, empathy, and self-care in preventing burnout and fostering resilience. Matt's expertise and his research-backed insights make him a very valuable resource for organizations aiming to improve employee well-being and long-term success. He is a key contributor to a global research initiative focused on understanding workplace burnout and promoting healthier behaviors. And today, we will be unpacking what him and his colleagues have learned about mastering sustainable performance. Specifically, Matt will be focusing on the polarity of personal growth and performance and zoom in on the early warnings of burnout and how it can be avoided. I will start by handing this over to Matt for about 15-20 minutes before I jump back in with my questions, but also yours too. So if you're joining us today in the audience, I know there were a few questions left from our audience members last week. We'll make sure to bring those back in for you, Matt. But if anyone's joining us here today, please leave your comments and questions as well, and we'll hopefully get to them towards the end of the session. Now, Matt, we haven't uploaded your presentation, so maybe we want to do that while we're here. We were so busy chatting when we started this, but thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I can share my screen, and I've got the presentation ready to go this end, which is probably the best way of
Let's do that.
getting through that. So let's have a go. Here we are.
Perfect.
Brilliant. Thanks, Marilyn. So, yeah, like you were saying, I'm part of a team of, well, a variety of people actually from different backgrounds, from coaching, from psychology, from business. And it's really understanding how people can perform, grow, and thrive in the workplace. And the goal is really for us to help people, individuals, and therefore the organizations that they work for to be able to perform at a high level, but with sustainability, decreasing stress, decreasing the risk of burnout. So we've spoken to a huge number of people around their experience of burning out and what led them to go through that process. And what I thought I'd do before I go into the second part of our conversation, which we almost got to last time, is do a quick recap on burnout. So the World Health Organization, they describe burnout as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress, which is not successfully managed. We're not saying people don't have stress in the workplace, but it's how we manage it. And it's characterized by 3 dimensions. We've got feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. We've got increased mental distance from the job, so disengagement from our work, feeling cynical about it and no longer positive. and then reducing the professional efficacy. We're not just not doing our job as well as we can. This has an impact for particularly knowledge workers. So, these organizational challenges, how do we navigate them? So meeting overload is a really key one, particularly when I did my study during COVID, how people were jumping from one online meeting to another without any break between the two. No time for deep work. With today's communications, it's very difficult for people to carve out time for deep work. So they'll work into the evenings, for example, when should be recharging for the next day. How do we minimize interruptions? How do we what strategies we put in place to organize our offline time, and how to prioritize it? Because it's very difficult to do for some people. We interviewed hundreds, I think we're actually into thousands of people now with regards to this because of the size of the team that we are. But we had people from all sorts of backgrounds, from the military, from the clergy, from the medical professions. There's huge amounts of burnout in the medical profession, particularly where I am in the UK. It's a really sort of hot topic at the moment. And then obviously we spoke to many executives across all sorts of different industries. And what we found was that there were two types of factors that were causing burnout. So organizational factors around workload, um, toxic bullying, toxic culture, and not feeling valued by the people that you're working for. And there were also individual factors. Were you doing something which you just completely goes against your values and maybe your beliefs? That lack of alignment. Do you fuse your identity with what you do at work? Do you lack boundaries? So all those sort of individual factors that play into that burnout narrative. We found that there were 3 stages of burnout. First degree burn, most people encounter this on a very regular basis. So having those heavy periods of stress at work, feeling overwhelmed, but you're able to continue to work effectively, particularly if you know that there's an end date. So if you're coming to end of financial year, for example, and you've got to get everything done by the time that finishes, yes, it can be stressful, but you know that when that's completed, then you can either take your foot off the gas, or you may be able to find time to recuperate. We then have second degree burnout. So we're now moving to chronic stress. This is where your motivation goes down, your effectiveness goes down, you're losing track of what you should be doing. And then if that continues, we then go into third degree burn. And this is where people start having physical symptoms. Some of the people that we interviewed, they didn't realize they were in this stage, and they've been in this stage when they reflected on it for months. It was only when things like the hair started falling out, or they'd start developing rashes, or their doctor was saying to them, you need to stop work, otherwise you're going to do yourself some serious harm. We also came up as part of this collective with this concept of the burnout growth curve. We see so many people who are in this loop, going up and down this part of the curve. So working hard, they worked hard in their 20s, worked hard in their 30s. They're working with increasing relentlessness in their 40s. But during that time, they've built up more responsibilities. They have family now. They might have mortgages now. They may have other responsibilities outside of work, as well as having higher positions of responsibility within their role. And not being mindful of the way that they're working, just working harder and harder, ends up coming down to this sliding us down the slope to the point of burnout. And many people were sort of oscillating up and down this particular curve. What we found for those people that learned from that was that they can come out the other side. It's starting to accept that there is a problem, speaking to other people, reflecting on the way that they're working, re-examining what were their priorities now. We spoke to one person whose doctor said to them, what do you want to achieve? And they listed a whole list of things, and they said, no, not what you wanted to achieve when you were 20, when you had no responsibilities and you could fully focus on work. What do you want to achieve now that you're in your 40s? And it's very different. And so it's experimenting with ideas and trying out new things to mitigate burnout, and then coming to this point, what we call post-traumatic growth. They actually came out the other side stronger, had more wisdom about what they were doing. So there is there is light at the end of the tunnel. It's not all about the left-hand side. It's getting people to understand that you can go across, and you don't have to get to the breakdown point to get to this post-traumatic growth area. What we want people to do is Yeah, you're working relentlessly at the moment, but learn from what you're doing. So instead of going down that slope, you actually hop across onto the post-traumatic growth side. And what we're going to go through today is some ideas and examples from the people that we've interviewed as to the way that they're now not burning out. So we've come up with what we call the 7 patterns of high performers with low growth risk. And like I said earlier, we interviewed over 1,000 people to come up with this information. We consolidated what we saw, the main themes, what seemed to work with a large number of people. Now, this feels slightly counterintuitive, but bear with me on this. Whilst they were in work, they worked very hard, very focused, using their work time, using their being mindful of when their energy was at its peak and when it wasn't at its peak, but being able to work very hard whilst in work mode. Um, Being focused is a really important thing for the people that we spoke to. Their motivation was high. But as we go through this, you'll see that there are things that allowed them to do this. The first thing that we came across was the value of deep work. And we've had so many discussions about this within the collective and within the people we've interviewed. Scheduling deep work every day is so important. What we found was that the value of what someone does is really what comes out of deep work. Productivity, yeah, that's great, but that can mean many things. What we found was that when people could take themselves away, not be interrupted, and it may only be for an hour or 2 hours a day, but if they could really get into a problem and take deep work, then they could achieve so much more. So what we came across here was this point around trigger points, and we can talk about this in a bit more in our discussion later, Marilyn. But you know, people were sort of thinking, right, okay, I'm going to schedule this in, or I'm going to get to a certain point in my day when I've done something, and that's going to trigger my deep work, and I'm going to focus and turn everything off for 60 minutes. Now, this isn't always easy. Um, Depending on where you work and what job you have and your level of responsibility, there may be people that trying to get in contact with you and need your assistance during the day. What we found was that people putting in strategies when they created the boundaries, and boundaries is a real important thing around burnout, being able to create those boundaries so that you are in more control of your day. But this element of deep work was a very deliberate act. Shallow work is required, but sometimes the shallow work takes over everything, especially if you don't have control of your diary. So scheduling deep work each day was very important. But going back to this duality, it's not accepting that it's not that shallow work is less important. It needs to be done, but where the value was deep work. So it's about getting that balance. We spoke to one person who was a senior exec at Amazon. In fact, he left Amazon, and in the past month or so, he's gone back to Amazon. He went through a period of burnout, and he sort of looked at his diary. He was never taking holidays. Get to the end of the year, and he's realised you've got to try and squeeze your holiday into the end of the year, or else you use your holiday days. So what he does now is he takes one long vacation every year. Normally with him, it's in the summer where he just completely turns everything off and spends time with the family, or they may go away. A short vacation every quarter. Now, that doesn't mean taking off a week. That could be taking off, if Saturday and Sunday is your weekend, then taking off a Friday and a Monday. So getting a 4-day break over a weekend, then 1 day off every month. Now, appreciate that different organizations and different geographies around the world aren't able to take a day off every month and then have a short vacation every quarter and a long vacation every year. The important point, I think, is that we are booking in our strategizing about our breaks across a calendar year, and we're working out when can we take some time off really to recharge, and making sure that it's in a regular place. They also make peace with not getting everything done. For a lot of people, having a to-do list at the beginning of the day that they don't get to the bottom of is a source of I don't know about shame, but certainly they beat themselves up. They haven't achieved everything that they wanted to achieve. And what we found is that once you get into this habit of prioritizing, being able to understand what is the most valuable, what is the most important work, and what can be put off, it was really important. So again, creating strategy around what you do during the day, when you do it, was really important. And also not feeling guilty at the end of the day if you haven't got everything done. This was a massive thing as part of the study that I did in COVID, when I was interviewing managers about the impact of working from home and what the impact of the pandemic was having. And this loss of commute to and from an office was a real big thing. People were getting out of the getting up in the morning at 8 o'clock, jumping straight on their laptop, working until 6 p.m. because now you're using your commute time to actually fit more hours work in the day. But commute times are really important. Being able to prepare yourself for the start of the day. If you've got a 30-minute trip to the office, you can get your head into work mode. It's a transition away from the home. And likewise on the way home, if you've had a stressful day, it's a time to decompress, start taking your mind away from the workplace as you head home. um, as I mentioned last week, we had one guy that said, I had a really stressful call with my manager. I turned around, opened the door, and there's my daughter holding handfuls of Lego, wanting to play. This transition is a really important factor. Just allows you to deconnect, and also, I said earlier about fusing your identity at work, being able to take that work identity and leave it at work, or leave it in your home office, or when you shut down the laptop, being able to leave it in the laptop almost, and being able to sort of transition it into you may be a parent, you may be a sibling, and you've got friends and social activity to do in the evening. It's being able to take this transition from the work into the and to go home. And then this comes into work home boundaries. So very similar. How do we create boundaries now where we have a situation where we have hybrid working very prevalent? How do we set boundaries between what we're doing as as workers whilst working at home, and then how do we transition across? What are our red lines? What will we not accept? Again, creating boundaries is really important for preventing burnout. Having a phone strategy. So this again is something which people have been speaking for decades now, ever since we were using mobile phones for work purposes. Being always contactable is a big issue, particularly for senior managers. So what strategy do you use? I was reading about one person the other day who they leave their phone on as they leave the phone to ring. So if somebody needs to contact them, they can ring them, but they're not checking emails. They're not checking text messages in the evening, that sort of thing. Easier said than done. But what we found with the people that we interviewed was that having a phone strategy, either as a distraction or as a tool for work, being able to put it away, was a real instigator for a better work-life balance with the people that we interviewed. And I know, Marilyn, we wanted to speak about this in a lot more detail, but being able to pulse between different modes. So when we go from deep work, and we have to do shallow work, we have to do deep work, but come up with a strategy so that you can do both at times that suit you, that are important for you, that you're not mixing and then not doing either particularly well. When are you offline and when are you online? How do you communicate that with your team? How do they accept it? So at an organizational level, this is a really important thing that we're talking to a number of organizations about. They are experimenting with how they will be instructing their workers to be online and offline, particularly managers. Boundaries, and if I go down to the sort of, if I drop down to two, so open door, again, very important for managers to be contactable. But how often should they keep their have an open door policy or a virtual open door? So when you're using Teams to communicate internally or using Slack, how do you say that you're not contactable, and how do you achieve that in a way that suits you, but also is seen as a positive, seen positively by your colleagues and by the organisation. When do we rest and recharge? Really important point here is rest is not a rest shouldn't be a luxury. Rest should be intentional. I'm resting because if I don't rest, my performance the next day is not going to be as good, particularly in the long term. How do we thrive? So being really sort of mindful about how you rest, what works for you. For some people, is sitting down and going on social media for an hour or two. For other people, they need to be a bit more proactive in terms of I go to the gym, or I may do some meditation, those sorts of things. But being really thoughtful about how you rest and recharge. Then how do you balance that with your exertion? Going back to what I said earlier, these performers that were performing at a high level but were at a low risk of burnout, they were exerting themselves during the working day. They're working very hard, but very mindful about how they rested, and very deliberate and had a strategy around it. Concentration and collaboration time. So thinking this is a little bit different to deep work, shallow work. Concentration time, yep, is deep work, but collaboration time can be deep work as well. So working in groups, but thinking about a very difficult problem and being very focused on that. So even though you're working in a team, you're not distracted. And then solo time and work time. What sort of work do you do better in a group, and what sort of work do you do better on your own? So yeah, very much this duality pulsing between different ways of working, but being mindful. And if you do it in the right way, then burnout is a much easier thing to avoid. And finding your opposite world. This is a brilliant one. This got triggered actually by the same guy that came up with the 111 concept. We were having a conversation with him, and it's like, well, what's the average tenure of somebody at Amazon? And it was like 3 years. So how long have you been there? He'd been there 10 years. Well, how have you managed that without burning out? And he said, well, actually, I did burn out. Well, how comes you're not burning out now? He said, well, I do the 111 thing. But he also does Argentinian tango. So that was a bit of an interesting a route to go down. He said, Argentinian tango allows me to be in a social situation outside of work. Nobody's interested about who you are, what your job is, how much money you earn, where you live. The only thing that matters is how you dance. And with Argentinian tango, you have to put your heart and soul into it as well. All day I'm thinking, being very analytical. How how he got out of that was doing Argentinian tango. He would come back feeling physically exhausted, but mentally completely refreshed. There's a slight tweak on that. We spoke to somebody else who said that they tried to do physical activity, but they joined a gym where it was I think it might have been that sort of spinning class type thing where it is very competitive and you're competing against other people, which she said it was exactly the same as what she did at work, very competitive work environment. Um, she found that doing deep sea diving was her thing, and because you can't think about anything else, anything about work, whilst you're in a very beautiful place, in a very otherworldly place, um, and also very conscious that you've got a certain amount of oxygen in your tank, and you need to be mindful of that. So finding your opposite world was really important. And this could be across a whole variety of different aspects. This could be physical, artistic, animals. I personally have got a dog, and I'm not entirely sure that she relieves my stress all the time, but she certainly allows me to uh, take my mind onto something else away from work. Being in nature, home projects, so that could be gardening or decorating property, and volunteering. And we found that sort of physical was the most popular. The numbers there sort of giving some indication around how often these sort of things came up. People were doing their opposite worlds were very around physical stuff, running, going to the gym, um, dancing was a massive one. Um, Artistic animals. What was really important, and I don't know if it goes on to the next page, no, it doesn't. What we found was that if people were able to do something physical with an animal in nature, that compounded the opposite world effect and really people got more benefit by mixing these things up. So artistic and home projects, they're two that come together very well. Also things like volunteering. It also allow people to sort of see how other people were in a situation which was maybe a little different to theirs. Gave them some perspective that work isn't everything. There's a big world out there, and people being able to sort of have empathy with someone else, and understand how someone else's life is, who's maybe less fortunate than yourself, was a really grounding experience. So what I'd like to do is just, for first sort of 30 seconds or just think about if you have any habits at the moment which take you out of work. Are there things that you'd like to do that you haven't got around to doing? Is there a way that you could bring these into your life? As either as part of during the workday. Is there something you could do during the middle of the day to take you out from work mode? What do you do well? What are you a bit of an expert in? Could you pass on your expertise to somebody else outside of a work environment? Or are there other things that you'd like to try? Any sort of things that you do outside of work that you'd like to get better at? Then I think it's really important to think about how you can fit these things into your life. Put some structure around your free time, not just have structure for your work day as well. And just a sort of one thing that we're doing as part of the collective is that we've come up with this concept of a grow, perform, sustain indicator, or GPS for short. So really good analogy with how you navigate from one place to another. So we're thinking, how do we navigate our careers? How do we grow and perform at the same time? How do we get that balance? And how to get this sustainable? And really, we've got a series of questionnaires basically that measure intrinsic motivation, and how it fits in with your values. How do your work fits in with your values in the workplace? And then this growth performance balance. How much are we growing? How much are we learning more? How much are we giving ourselves new skills to help out in the workplace? And then how are they taking those into the workplace and performing at a high level? And what we found that is if we can get this balance right, then it really helps with sustainability. It really helps with being able to be both being a manager, being a business leader, and then having other identities outside of the office, so that this burnout risk is low. So so like I was just saying here, learn about new things. How do we explore new things? How do we take on new concepts, and then balancing that with how we perform? How do we deliver results? It's a fascinating area that I could talk about for ages, but what we found was that if you get this balance right, it really helps as you move sort of through your career. And then we have this this output from our surveys, and we can we can now give you a good indication as to where you are in terms of that sort of burnout risk. Are you heading towards the red end? What we're trying to do is get people back out down towards the yellow and green end. So that's what we do. Hopefully that's given you a lot of food for thought. And let's just move screens here. There we go.
Yeah, we're all good.
Hopefully, Marilyn, that may have triggered a few thoughts for yourself and a few questions.
By the way, so many. I have to tell you, since we got the opportunity to have this session last week, which we couldn't complete, my team and I have had many opportunities to discuss your work and your research. I've also talked about it with friends. For me especially, it was obviously a confirmation bias, but when I think it was Nick Petrie, who's part or leads the research project.
Yeah, he's the leader, yeah.
That posted about the pulsing thing in terms of going between different work modes, and then when you talk to us about the opposite world thing, it resonated tangentially with this concept of polarities. So obviously that was kind of what brought us into this discussion. But we've been talking a lot about how practical these tips are, but also how we may not be applying all of them yet. And there's a lot that we need to do to get better at it. I want to talk about the pulsing thing because that to me was the first thing that resonated. And I like to think that the cosmic centers are like incredibly efficient, high performing individuals and teams. And when I saw this insight about pulsing between modes, I was like, oh, we do that. That's really incredible. And so I want to spend a little bit more time on this topic as a first question, really, and to kind of ask you if a lot of the people that are in our audience are leaders themselves, as well as individual contributors, but there's always a bigger burden on leaders to role model, to set the pace, and to bring in these new practices. I think you had a very nice visual last time about like evolving your operating system. And I think evolving the operating systems of teams is something that is the key responsibility of a leader. How do you talk to leaders, whether they're team leaders or organizational executive leaders, about bringing in this dimension of pulsing between work modes and making it truly part of their ways of working?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, I think we instinctively know that putting our foot down on the gas at 100% the entire day in one direction is never going to be successful in the long term. We need, I think, how managers implement it. And again, one of the things that we found is that the culture of the organization is really important to enable this. And to enable this, well, the culture of the organization comes down from the top. So therefore, the people that we're speaking to are very senior executives who have that ability to be able to first understand what we're proposing. Secondly, we get them to experiment with what they could try for different modes, and particularly in opposite worlds, but being able to strategize about the day around this sort of pulsing, deep work, shallow work, open door, closed door. Where do you set your boundaries, and putting strategies around that? And then that then filters down through the organization. I think it'd be very difficult. I can think of many organizations where if you're just either sort of a low manager or just a general employee saying, well, actually, no, I can't talk right now because I'm doing my deep work for the next 2 hours. That wouldn't go down particularly well. It really needs to be put into the culture. And as we know, culture change is a very difficult thing. The important points is that it starts off as small scale, small experiments that people can try within the boundaries that they have within the organization, and to try different things. So, this I can't go on about this thing around shallow work, being able to carve out deep work out of shallow work, because if we don't carve it out, then our whole day will be responding to instant messaging, text messaging, emails, phone calls, and we never get to do the actual valuable stuff. But in terms of implementing the pulsing thing, I'm afraid it does have to come down from the top. But if it does come down from the top, it has much more likelihood of embedding in the organization, and becoming a practice that the organization is proud of. And they're able to say to people coming to the business, look, we appreciate that you're coming into the business. You have a huge amount of value coming in. Otherwise we wouldn't have employed you. But we want to get that out of you, and we're not going to get that out of you by bombarding you with reactive processes all day long.
Sure.
So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a follow-up question to that, also prompted by a question from the audience around how work-life balance as a concept may vary across cultures. It may also vary across individuals, right? Like we don't all have the same understanding or desire for work-life balance. I'll give you an example for myself. I became a manager quite early in my career. So I've been a manager for most of my career. But I'm also very competitive, super hardworking. Like I don't think I've ever had a job where I worked less than 10 to 12 hours on average a day, happily, and I've often found myself, whether in different cultural, because I'm an immigrant. So immigrants, we have other motivators, like safety and security is still very low for us. Ambition, the Lebanese, for example, particularly, like we overinvest in our kids' education to a crazy degree. So whether in different cross-cultural contexts or with other individuals who may have had a different definition, I've always been faced with like, I want you to set your own boundaries, but they're not going to look like mine. If that makes sense. And I will respect yours, but I'm not going to lessen how hard I work for you, if that makes sense. Have you seen that, like that discrepancy, whether it's, cross-cultural or individualistic, and how do you manage the fact that we don't all have the same definition of this?
I think work-life balance is a big problem in the naming of it.
Mm,
I'm much more of a fan of work-life harmony, which
mm,
means for work-life balance, a lot of people, I've worked 8 hours, therefore I'm going to take 8 hours off. If you uh, People we spoke to incredibly passionate about their work, and that passion can take them into very high performing but also really highly demanding areas that require performance at a high level over a long period. Work-life balance wouldn't work for them because the word balance means it's even. So work-life harmony, I think, is a much better way of thinking it. That what works for you, how do you? Because your work may energize you. The problem is that some people get so deep into it that everything else goes out the window, and
yeah.
therefore um, their body starts saying no. But by the time it's that point, it's a bit too late to be making small interventions. So it's just being a bit more mindful. Like I say, you're saying earlier around sort of boundaries and being able to implement your own boundaries, which doesn't mean half and half, but it means your boundaries work for you, and in that sort of work-life harmony thing. We also, one thing you said around sort of safety, security, and it's true. The people that we've spoken to, who particularly in the US, around having it's not really an immigrant mindset, but a lot of people have this mindset where they may have had a tough upbringing, and therefore
Yeah,
they want to work really hard, never to be back into a situation of, in
yeah,
some cases, poverty.
yeah,
Um, and like you say, from a cultural perspective, there are particular cultures where hard work is driven in at a very young age, and achievement is driven in at a very young age. Um, and that's I'm not making a value judgment on whether that's good or bad. I think what's important when you are working is working what works for you. So, you know, if I'm going to work 8 hours a day, I'm not going to be starting a new business. It's just not going to happen. But I'm going to be passionate about it. I'm going to be passionate as soon as I get up in the morning. I'm going to be passionate in the evening. But it's just having that little bit extra self-awareness
mm,
around, I can't push myself, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 52 weeks a year. My body requires me to move
yeah,
away. And it's
for sure.
putting those things in place to allow that.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think for me, like one thing that I think really works well for us, and of course, the bigger an organization gets, the harder, but in the end, an organization is a collection of teams or smaller groups, is to really understand people's individual preferences and try to be as accommodating. Of course, you can still ask them to sacrifice. For example, a question we always ask new joiners, and I asked it to someone who joined our team just today, is, are you a morning or an evening person? It sounds stupid, but if you're not a morning person, I will not set an 8 a.m. meeting with you, because we'll both be miserable. And we do a lot of adaptability and flexibility around people's personal lives. Are they parents or not? Do they have a hobby? We had a employee who was a taekwondo teacher, and he's like, I love this and I love teaching. Because we're like, great, keep it up, no problem, you can come back online when you're done. So I think providing that flexibility and asking the personal preference questions is key, and then you as a leader, you can then adapt to each individual. Now, we have a question here from Mariana in the audience, and I also had that as well. So we've spoken a lot about the individual and how they can manage their own time, find their opposite world, schedule their vacation. Like there's a lot of kind of self-regulation there. We've spoken about how a leader can contribute to this, but where do you see the role of the organization more broadly, whether it's to help people find their opposite world, whether it's to manage burnout effectively? What's the burden of responsibility on companies there?
Well, I think we mentioned, I think mentioned it last week around performance and productivity. I think the important thing is value. So how
Mm,
do we drive the value out of a person? So productivity, I think that really pushes a culture of, all we're concentrating on is what you can produce for us, in across the day, how many hours you're performing for. I think when you talk about value, that really starts tuning into how you work best, how you can drive more value into the organization, how you can think more deeply to
Mm.
generate the new ideas that are going to drive the business forward. When you think about an organization like Apple, for example, you know the iPhone didn't come out of people just doing shallow work all day and wondering when they're going to sell the next PC. The applications that came on that, and that the way that revolutionized the way that we work and the way that we communicate, that came out of lots of people spending a lot of time doing deep thought, deep work. And
Yeah.
therefore, if you want to increase the value of your organization and come up with new ideas that's going to drive the business forward and become the leader in your field, it's not rocket science when you really think about it. So yeah, at an organizational level, it's having that capacity as an organization to understand what value do we want to drive from the business that's going to help us be a leader for years to come.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. We do a lot of research work in our company, but we're also consultants out of Dubai, where everything happens at the speed of light. For example, have been running this research project for 2.5 years, and just this last week, finally submitted it, hopefully to a business magazine that we all love and respect, and we'll see if we'll get accepted or not. But with my team, we were joking this morning that it was really difficult, even as the CEO, to kind of keep proving that it was worth it. But sometimes that's the thing, like you got to let some things live on their island so that they can grow it to something. I mean, the value of us being published in that way and all of this research is immeasurable, but it took 2.5 years of being willing to let that thing stew at a very different, speed than everything else. And I think that ability to, again, balance those polarities and understand that both are worthy and both are worthwhile, I think that's the real, like the hard mental exercise for a lot of us, because we're in a very post-industrial efficiency, productivity, no slack, no extra fat anywhere. We don't build companies that have that slack anymore. And I think the world we live in and the requirements of it are teaching us to maybe go back to having a bit of fat for the winter, so to speak.
Yeah, but it's that was very much in line with what you were looking to achieve from a values perspective, and what you felt was
Exactly.
important, and where that you're very passionate about it. And so I completely understand where you're coming from. But in terms of that organizational thing, it's embedding the values of really encouraging people to bring their best selves to work, to do it in a sustainable way, where it's going to drive real value to the business, not just bottom line for this quarter, but what's going to drive innovation and those sorts of areas. I think if you can set the boundaries, if you can get the culture on board, and like I say, it is convincing some very senior people to make those changes. In an ideal world, every business would have these values at the very start of the business and evolve them and develop them as they grow. But yeah.
I mean, as always, the beauty of this in some ways is that it comes down to mindsets and human behaviors and values and really fundamentals, principles, things we will not, back away from, that will stand for forever. And I think that's also beautiful because it means so much of this is within our control, no matter what the powers that be might say, or whatever we like to call them. I really love how down to earth and practical your advice has been as well, Matt. I love conceptual conversations, but I also love ones where I feel like, and I can see this from the comments of this week and the comments of last week, there is so much to take away that we can apply tomorrow, which I think is incredibly valuable. As it's kind of that pulsing thing, like we need to, we need the practical stuff that I can do tomorrow, and we need the big picture conceptual
And
thing.
it doesn't have to be a big thing. You can experiment with just start off with small scale, try little things, and see what works for you.
Yeah, I will definitely. I'm applying the 1-1-1 concept. I've spoken to my husband about it, and I'm definitely revisiting, my other worlds, because I think I've let go of them a little bit, and I think it's time to return or to explore new ones.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, for inspiring that. And I'm sure a lot of us will come back to you in a few weeks or months and tell you how valuable it was and how much it's been, a great discussion and able to boost our ability to perform sustainably.
Oh,
And
well, thanks for the opportunity.
absolutely. Thank you to our audience. I also saw a few people return from last time, so I'm so grateful for that. As always, it's really beautiful to see all of you here. If you missed it, the video will be available on LinkedIn, but we'll also repost it on our YouTube website and so on, and all those links will be available. If you want to share this with someone who you think could really benefit from some of the advice that was shared here today, you can find all of the content on our website or through our newsletter. And then to wrap it up, we have 2 more sessions, both of which are taking place tomorrow. The first one, which is about midday UAE time, I'll be delivering around how to take all these concepts. We've spoken a lot about polarities in the context of individuals, teams, how to develop your range as a leader. I'll be talking a little bit more about how this concept scales into organizations. I'll be talking about polarity in strategy and in structure and in culture. And I'll be using one of my favorite case studies, Fujifilm, to help illustrate that. And then later in the day at 6 p.m. UAE time, you must join us for our closing session. It's now a tradition. It's our 5th year hosting the closing session with Joe Santos, who was my professor at INSEAD and teaches multinational management. And together tomorrow, we'll be unpacking the limitations of polarities. Controversial, I know, for a conference that's been all about polarities. But I think, as with any framework, the map is not the territory. It's always good to understand when the tool is relevant. And so Joe and I will be talking about when we feel polarities don't apply. All here on LinkedIn Live tomorrow at 6 p.m. UAE time. Thank you once again for being with us, and we hope to see you for the next one. Cool. We didn't take a portrait.